Good afternoon. Welcome to the WISE Debate 3.A. This is a debate about the role of the media in higher education. I'm Don Guttenplan. I'm the lead education writer for the International Herald Tribune. And I'm going to introduce you very briefly to the rest of the panel, and then they'll say a bit about themselves and their publications relationship with education. So immediately to my left is Suneet Johar, who's from the Times of India. There's Luc Bronner, who's from Le Monde, and Philippe Kela from Euronews. I'm going to start. We have the IHT, for those of you who don't know it, it looks like this. It's a print media publication, but we are also on the web. We are the global edition of the New York Times. And we cover education around the world, but particularly every Monday we have an education section. The IHT is also frequently used by English language schools and colleges around the world. So if you go to lots of parts of the world where they teach English, you'll find stacks of the IHT used as course material. We don't write it with that intention, but it is used that way. Our education section focuses mainly on professional and postgraduate education in the IHT. The New York Times, of course, covers education from birth to grave, but we cover mainly postgraduate and professional education. Suneet, all yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm from the Times of India, which is the largest media group in India. It has the Times of India newspaper, which is the largest English broadsheet in the world, with a circulation of 4.4 million daily and a cumulative readership of over 13 million. It also brings out the Economic Times, which is the second largest financial broadsheet in the world after the Wall Street Journal. It has other publications and a strong presence on the internet with TUI.com. And in radio, mobile, and television. Should I speak about the role of the Times of India in education now?
Sure.
Okay. Sure. The Times of India also plays a huge role in education. Broadly speaking, it's in revenue generation, information, and corporate social responsibility. Firstly, I mean, as a private company, we have to generate revenue if we are to play in that field. And education is amongst our top 3 advertising verticals, generating about $60 million in revenue for us. In addition, we have a very large newspapers in education program, which comes out in 11 cities of the country, reaches more than 2,000 schools, and we print more than 600,000 copies daily. This comes out 5 to 6 days a week, depending on whether the school runs for 5 days or 6 days in the week. And this is a profitable initiative for us, surprisingly. It's a special edition, a student edition, which is targeted at students, and it's an 8-page broadsheet, whereas the main Times of India, which goes to adults, can be anywhere from 24 to 32 pages plus supplements. In addition, we have an Education Times supplement, which is distributed free of cost every Monday with the Times of India. It comes out in 22 cities with a circulation of 4.4 million. And it broadly gives 4 kinds of information: educational opportunities in India, educational opportunities abroad, counseling for students, and advertising from private schools, private colleges, the government educational sector, as well as coaching institutes, which are now huge in India and prepare 12th standard students for entry into undergraduate courses. We also run a mission admission program, which guides students in Delhi through the labyrinthic process of getting admission into Delhi University, where the number of seats are very limited. This we do via massive print coverage as well as through a dedicated website, counseling, and face-to-face sessions with students. We also run a Teach India initiative as a corporate social responsibility initiative. We spend $2 million behind it every year. This runs out of Delhi and Bombay. where we basically teach adults who've completed their 12th standard education and who come from the underprivileged sectors. We teach them a 3-month dedicated English language course designed by the British Council. Because what we found in India is that knowledge of the English language can double or even triple your salary potential and breaks you out of the cycle of poverty into the so-called lower middle class. So with this 3-month course, it's not just English education. After that, we also run placement services for them, whereby organized retail, whereby organized retail, fast food outlets, as well as coffee chains come and recruit them. We also have several other initiatives. We run a Times School of Journalism and a Times School of Marketing as a sort of kitchen garden to generate and train journalists and marketing professionals for our company. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Luc?
As a chief editor for Le Monde, I will be quite modest in front of you because the figures for circulation you gave us are quite impressive. Le Monde is one of the most famous newspaper in France, and education is the heart of attendance. I mean, for years, Le Monde has decided to produce some editorial contents for teachers, for students, for pupils, for parents. And it is one of our main goals because we believe that education is one of the most important subjects for political debates, economical debates, and I want to say how important for us is the WISE because it is the best place to meet actors for education. And how important are for Le Monde educational debates because we believe that it is one of the most important subjects. Just a joke. Former Minister of Education said in France a few years ago, his name is Xavier Darcos, and he made a comparison between soccer and education, saying that in France we have 65 million citizens. And as a joke, he said, when the national team is playing, we have 65 million national coaches. And he always said that in France we have 65 million ministers of education. And I think he's quite right because about education, almost everyone can have his own idea. And I think that most of parents, most of students, teachers can say what should be done for universities, what should be done for primary schools, and so on. So for Le Monde, which circulation is really modest, I don't know if I can say it now, but it is something like 300,000 each day. And our website is something like 2 million each day. So for France, we have quite good results. But education is one of our strategic issues for the next years.
Thank you. I just want to say we would all love to have the Times of India's circulation numbers. But look, I think you're being a little bit too modest. I think Le Monde is the lever that moves the francophone world. So where you put the fulcrum may not matter quite as much, but I think we all pay a lot of attention to what Le Monde has to say. Philippe Kela, please tell us about yourself and Euronews, and then there's going to be a brief film.
Thank you. Euronews is in the TV industry, conversely to my colleagues who are in the print industry. So maybe we could start with a short video to stress what we are, more or less. So Learning World is one of our key programs. But before addressing that particular point, I would like to give you some background about Euronews for those who don't know what it is, why we are here. Euronews is an international news channel which is broadcast all over the world. We are using a network of 38 satellites, so it's available everywhere in the world. In addition to that, it's a multilingual channel, conversely to my colleagues who apparently speak either English or French. Euronews speaks 11 languages, including English and French, but with 9 other languages, which is very specific and important for Euronews, because to give you a very simple figure, we have computed that with the 11 languages we have, we can be understood by half of the world population. So it gives you an idea of the range of people we can address with this multilingualism. The real reach of Euronews is only, I would say, 350 million people, which is 20% of the world population. So it gives you an idea of the target we have coming from 20 to 50% of world population. This is the reach, but of course the audience is not at the same level, because not everybody watches Euronews all the time. But we are the #1 international news channel in Europe. We are the most watched international news channel. So that is the background. Coming to education, first of all, we started some years ago a program banking on our multilingualism capacity, whose name is Tell Me More. Tell Me More, it is a program which is available on the web and which gives you the possibility to improve your level in foreign languages. For instance, you will be watching a Euronews program, in fact, and you will be asked some question of comprehension, and so you can improve yourself by answering these questions and seeing at what level of capacity you are. So that was the first step into the education world. 1 year ago, we launched Learning World in association, in partnership with the Qatar Foundation, and this is the reason for our presence here, because WISE, of course, is a product of the Qatar Foundation. And Learning World has been broadcasting for 1 year now. We are going to increase the production for the next year. We are producing a weekly program, short, 10 minutes, but rebroadcast 16 times in the week in the 11 languages of Euronews. And this program gives some insight about the level of education at various levels, primary, high school, university, everywhere in the world. So it's a sampling of what's going on, especially in terms of advanced education, of looking to new tracks for educating youngsters and children. We have also connection with, it's an interactive program. We are using Facebook and Twitter, but maybe we will come to that later. In September, we had 15,000 unique browsers visited the Learning World pages on Euronews, and 5,000 Learning World videos were started, to give you some figures, which is twice as high as it was in June, so we are progressing rapidly. And on the site, I should say that behind Europe, the Middle East is Asia and Middle East are the second region of origin of our visitors, and that the main countries visiting our sites are Russia, France, US, Italy, and Turkey, to give you a sample of what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. I think maybe we'll kick off by going around and having people say a bit about their own view of the role of the media. There'll be time for questions, so if you have questions, please think of them and try and remember them. I just want to stress 3 things. If you want to get covered by me, the easiest way to do it is to do something wrong and then get caught at it. So, you know, if you're promising to teach people things and you're taking their money and you're not teaching them, that's a good way to get in the newspapers. If you are promising to give people an education and then you're not giving them an education, that's a good way to get in the newspapers. That's the easiest way, but that's just the way newspapers work. It doesn't have anything to do with me or even with the New York Times. The second easiest way is to do something new. And I think here the media has a big role to play in education, because if you do something new and it's something good and it's something that other people might want to adopt or learn from, well, how are they going to find out about it? And one of the easiest ways for people to find out about it is to hear about it in the media. And so I feel that's a big part of my role, is to be aware of what's happening that's new and that might be useful for people to know about. And then the third part of my role, and this is not something that's dictated by my editors, it's just the way I work, is if I find something that interests me, that I think readers would be interested in just because they're generally curious about the world. So it may not be particularly useful, but it may be interesting. You may be a person with a compelling story. You may be an institution that's trying to do something against great odds. You may be a scholar whose work, although it may not cure cancer or solve global illiteracy, is still something that people can engage with and relate to. And so I see my job as to give a platform to people like that, and to give our readers a window on what's going on in the world that they wouldn't otherwise notice. So I suppose for me that boils down to being skeptical. So you know, if you claim you're doing something, I want to know that you're doing it, because the reason that people turn to the IHT is because they can believe that what we say is true. That's probably our main selling point, aside from being in English. So my first duty as a journalist is to be skeptical. But my second duty is to be curious, and I think that's my role. Now I realize we're sort of split between, if you want, practicing journalists and editors, or managers rather than editors. So but I thought some of you would at least want to hear from somebody at the street level with a notepad, and that's what causes me to get out my notepad. So, Sunit. I guess what I'm saying is, what do you think our role is? The role of the media, not particularly your own organization, but the larger role.
Well, I must see. Media, firstly, can impact policy. For example, in India, unlike, say, in the Western countries or other developed economies, we do not have universal literacy. The latest census figures of 2011 show 72% literacy. We still do not have full enrollment at the primary level. Dropout rates are still quite high. So, for example, the Right to Education Act, which was passed about a year and a half ago in India, was highlighted in our publications and other publications. The issues which are coming up in terms of the implementation of the Right to Education Act are highlighted by media. For example, one of the provisions of the Right to Education Act is that private schools need to guarantee 1/4 of their seats to underprivileged children. The government will pay their fees, but obviously not at the level which the normal students pay, or from more privileged backgrounds pay. So a lot of schools, private schools, are resisting this. We are highlighting this, highlighting the lacunae in the implementation and the way forward. Similarly, one more example, the Indian government a few years ago reserved 27% of seats in higher education institutions for the so-called other backward castes. The Prime Minister of India also made the commitment that the seats in the general category would not change. Now what that means is that you need more seats in institutions, which cannot happen overnight. The Times of India, along with other media institutes, highlighted this, and so the government changed its policy and implemented this in a staggered way over 3 years. So this is just one example in which media can influence policy.
Luke.
I believe we have 3 different goals, 3 different directions as a journalist and as an editor for Le Monde. The first one is quite obvious. I would say news, news, and news. As a journalist, I think we have to give the informations about education policies, educational debates, and this kind of general interest subjects. It is the first point. I will give you one example. As you probably know, in France we'll have presidential elections next year during in April, and education will be one of the most important subjects because, as I said at the beginning of our session, it is a subject of interest for both teachers, parents, students, and our goal in the electoral campaign is to inform the debate and is to decode the programs of the candidates, for example. And we have several questions we have to be very cautious with. For example, do we have to increase students' fees, for example, which is a very important question. Should we increase the number of public service teachers, for example, which is a current subject of debates in France? So the first main goal is news, and as you said, we have to be skeptical and curious on this subject. Our second mission is different. As a national media, we have to offer the best services to our customers, and I think education is from rankings, for example, to personal and private services or coaching, for example. I think that we can offer some help to different people. And I read a portrait of the global editor of the New York Times last week in the New Yorker, and she had a sentence, and she said, "We are not only a newspaper," and she was talking about the New York Times, of course, but I think she's right. And Le Monde is not only a newspaper, and during the next year we're trying to implement services around educational issues. The third mission, I would say, is trying to offer teaching and learning material. And as Wikipedia did in the last years, I think that newspapers, medias, you talked about your program for television, we can provide some contents for students, for example. And in the next months, we'll try to develop offers in direction to students to help them to progress for the formation. So if I sum up, I would say news is a main goal for journalists, of course, but services and teaching and learning materials are second but very important missions.
Okay, so we offer news, we offer to keep you informed, but we also help you to learn explicitly. You have a much bigger reach than all of the rest of us at this table put together, Philippe. So do you want to say a bit about how Euronews feels it engages with the larger society?
Yes, I would say since we are not a national channel, a national newspaper like Times of India or Le Monde, who are influential in their own country for policymakers, we don't pretend to influence policymakers because we have an international reach, and even if we have a European origin, we don't pretend to influence politicians themselves. We try rather to create some community which is in line with Euronews as a general editorial line. And maybe we try, like you mentioned you do, maybe coming to your second point, to try to find original experiences around the world, to try to, so we send journalists to Africa, to South America, to India, and we try to identify original experiences which can be of value for other regions of the world. And so, first of all, it can cover very diversified geographic areas, very diversified thematics. For instance, recently we did something about education to peacemaking, learning with animals, single-sex education, economic crisis and education, so a very large range of thematics. And by making it available to the entire world through our network, we try to create a community. And I would like to say that there is a mutual benefit in using satellite television and social networks. We have opened a Facebook account, we have opened a Twitter account, and so we have a journalist who is around, Mrs. Maha Barabas, who is doing it from here, from Qatar. and she is animating this network. And so people from the entire world can watch the program and can send their comments on Facebook or Twitter, and we have our journalists moderating the debate between all the people. So we are creating a community which starts to be very active, and in addition of that, we are very proud because we learned that some universities in the US, in Europe, are using our programs in their own courses, so which is also a very significant sign of success for our program.
Thank you. I'm gonna be skeptical for a minute, and I'm gonna go this way around the table. So I'm gonna come back to you first, Philippe, but I'm warning you that I'm gonna come to you. And what I'm gonna be skeptical about is you said that you have a Twitter account and Facebook account. I have a Twitter account and a Facebook account, and I'm wondering, what do we offer that people can't get anywhere else? You know, I mean, we've been talking about what we try to do, and what we see as our role, but are we really necessary? I mean, in the world where people can speak to each other directly, what do they need mediation for, or should we just get out of the way?
I think you gave yourself the answer a few minutes before, because we are reliable. The IHE is reliable. I think Euronews is reliable as well. And so coming to the Euronews account, they know that they will communicate with people who are watching Euronews, referring to the same stories, to the same reliable stories, and which are valid for themselves. So I think the fact that the media have a brand, our brand is what it is. It is a recognized channel. In addition to that, I should say that we are in the range of the serious news channel. We are not at all in the infotainment industry. We are in the opposite of that. Our editorial line is a public service editorial line. We have a public remit, and so in this sense, it means that all our stories refer to something which is of general interest. So I think it's important for the education world to know that what is presented is not only appearance or imagination. It is a real thing. It exists, and you can use that content for your own purpose.
So our capital, in a sense, is our reputation for reliability. Do we offer anything else, Luc?
Nothing to add about reliability. I think it is the main question for us, and it is the challenge to keep reliability even when we have to confront with politicians, for example. And I think it's the main question. For Le Monde, we try to keep the best journalist for educational issues, and I think it's the best answer to have a special team, and they produced this supplement for the WISE Summit. And the idea for us is to offer to our readers the best news and the best quality. And I think reliability, you said, I would say quality is the best answer for medias in our current world.
Okay, so we have reliability, we have quality. I'm not sure that's still going to keep us in business. Is there anything else we have to offer, Sunit?
Well, I agree with Philippe and Luc, but I would add one more thing. In addition to reliability, we provide scale. For example, in the Teach India initiatives of 2008 and 2009, what we found was that we have a lot of poor children in the country who are not getting educated. In addition, most of the readers of Times of India tend to be of the middle and upper income classes. You have housewives, you have working professionals who have free time in the evening and on weekends. You have retired people who want to contribute to society. What we did is we tied up with a lot of NGOs, and we launched this campaign whereby we were able to place 100,000 of our readers as teacher volunteers with these NGOs to go to the JJ Jhuggi Jhopri or slum clusters and teach students. We did a follow-up campaign in 2009 because there were some dropouts of teachers, and we were able to place another 13,000 teachers. So yes, individuals can also do that, but a large media house can contribute scale to the whole effort.
Okay, so reliability, and also we have campaigning. We have the fact that we can mobilize people, we can motivate people. But are there pitfalls? Are there things that, particularly about education, that make it an area that can be difficult for journalists? I'm going to go this way around the table again and ask you what you find difficult, and I'm going to begin with a confession. I came to education, my background in journalism is as an investigative journalist. So the déformation professionnelle of an investigative journalist is to be beyond skeptical. And I found it very difficult to adjust to covering a field where, in fact, most of the people you meet mean well. And you sort of have to, so you have to dial back a bit, not on your skepticism, but on your assessment of their motivation. And you sometimes have to give people more of a chance for their own motivations and their own goals to emerge than I was used to. So that I found that difficult about education. Is there something about the area that you feel is particularly challenging for a journalist?
Well, firstly, see, the Times of India, as a paper, what we've observed is that most publications worldwide focus on the 5 Ds, on negative news: death, decay, destruction, disease, disaster. That's not the Times of India policy. I mean, if you want, India's made tremendous progress in the last 2 decades, but there's still a lot of poverty. The Times of India likes to give hope and optimism. So in a field like education, where so many parties are doing such good work, we like to highlight that. Having said that, yes, we do run into problems. For example, I must confess that when we ran Teach India, we, because of the very difficult conditions in which our volunteer readers had to teach, we had a 90% dropout of teachers within 3 months and a 97% dropout at the end of 12 months. So we had to do a refresher, fill up in 2009. And then later we totally rejigged the concept where we started putting our own money to teach the underprivileged youth. So,
Luc, what do you feel has been a particular challenge for Le Monde in education?
I don't think that education is difficult for journalists. I think it's quite common. But the main difficulties would be the fact that if you want to understand education, you have to have knowledge in history. For example, in France, it's very important to understand the current debates around education, because our system is a centralized system, and it's because history of the French Revolution. So I believe history is very important to understand the French debates around education. I think economical issues are quite important. For example, for the higher education debates, because we are in a world of competition, and it is economical competition. I think that sociology is really important to understand education. So I would say journalism in education is not so difficult, but you have to have a global approach with a psychological approach. For example, when you talk about primary schools, for example. So I would say it is the main question is, for a journalist, can he or she complete this whole global vision about education?
Philippe.
I think for mass media like Euronews, I'm not a journalist myself, but what I hear from my journalists is that the most difficult is maybe to go down from the educators to educated, not to limit the message to a small niche of educators, of professors and teachers who have, of course, professional interest in education, but to reach a larger audience of youngsters, pupils, students, who are playing their life in the education system now, and to raise their interest. So to give some stories which are of interest for a larger audience. And I would say from a TV point of view, you may know that in the media world, TV is more or less associated to the ancient world, whereas social networks are associated to the modern world, because youngsters don't watch TV anymore. Now they are playing with their mobile, going to Facebook and whatever it is. So for us as a TV channel, it is a way also to reach a population which is already using largely the social media, and to raise their interest in a field which is of utmost interest to them now. So it's a way of developing our channel through this program to a new audience, to a younger audience, to refresh, I would say, the profile of our audience with young viewers.
Okay. I'm going to take off from something you said, Philippe, which is you've been talking about a young audience. And I think it's something that it's important for all of us, is to remember that although we spend most of our time talking to teachers, administrators, educators, that the people who are at the sharp end of education are the students. And I think it was very useful to be reminded, and we need to remind ourselves, particularly in a conference that's mostly educators, that the student voice is something that needs to be heard and brought into the conversation. We're going to go to questions in a minute, but before we do, I'd like to give everybody a chance, and I'll go this way around, to say very briefly, just in a minute or two, what kind of things are on your radar in terms of education, what you think the things are over the horizon that you are particularly interested in paying attention to, or that you want to know more about, or that your publication is interested in, or your outlet is interested in. For me, the big things that I'm looking at now are marketization, so the increasing role of the private sector as a provider of education, and the kind of stresses and tensions and debates that kicks off in different societies. I'm based in England, although I cover all of Europe, and the IHT covers education all around the world. But there's been a huge debate about the rise in tuition fees, and behind that, a sense that British education is heading towards an American model of more privatization. So that's one thing. The second thing I'm interested in is credentials, and what you get at the end of an education process. You know, does a degree represent a period of time spent in an institution, or does it represent a series of competences? And if it represents a series of competences and those can be delivered online for a half, a quarter, a tenth of the cost, then what is going to happen to the institutions that used to deliver those degrees? Are they going to end up like the kind of places where people used to keep their horses? Are they all going to disappear? And of course, the third thing that I'm sure we're all paying attention to is the increasingly global nature of education, and the fact that students are mobile, academics are particularly mobile. I heard somebody the other day, a university president, compare able academics to footballers. I have to tell you, as someone who's taught in the university myself, I'd love to think that that we were going to be like David Beckham someday and pursued around the world. I'm not sure that's really true, but it is true that there's an increasingly global market, but beyond the market, it's also a kind of global stage. So those are three things that are always on my screen. What do you think is important to pay attention to, Philippe?
I think your second point is very important, how to maybe to use the internet revolution to increase the accessibility to education to many youngsters who don't have today. And also through the diversity of experience in each part of the world to try to help develop the education in where there is a strong need, and how to use the new devices, for education purpose, how not to transform education institutions, as you said, as horse stalls or whatever it is. In fact, what institutions can play in the future is very important. I think it is key to get the 100% of the population educated using the new technologies without destroying the existing useful system.
Thank you. Luc?
You said marketizing. I think so. I mean, we are confronting with a global system and with a high level of competition between universities, for example, in the world. And I think that is the first main issue for the next years. I would say technology is a great challenge, and we can see devil problems, but I think that with new technologies we have a lot of solutions for education, and I believe that in the next years, in the next decades, will be able to improve our educational system thanks to new technologies. I think the last point would be democracy and the fact that, as we observed in the Arab revolutions these last months, and I think about the reports of our special envoy in Libya, for example, and she said that part of the fighters were young leaders, graduated, and they wanted to fight for democracy. And I think that in our global and global world, education and democracy are two main issues, and all the current debates in Europe, for example, about referendum or about parliament power, for me, are linked with the educational issues. So I would say democracy and education would be the third point.
Thank you.
I think one of the key challenges in India is to ensure that students who complete their 12th standard or get high school also end up becoming graduates and postgraduates. And the number of seats in India in colleges, universities, etc. is pitifully inadequate. So what we're doing is, from our side, we have started taking out magazines which focus on career educational opportunities for students all across the world, as well as educational opportunities beyond post-graduation. The other thing I think we need to highlight is the need to allow for-profit education in India. You have government which plays a role through government schools, you have private schools which play a role, but as per the Indian Constitution and the Supreme Court judgment, for-profit education is not allowed in India. So you have, without naming names, you have strange cases in India whereby institutes are charging $45,000 a year in India, and they call themselves not-for-profit. Similarly, the Indian government has allowed foreign universities to set up shop in India, but they are supposed to be not-for-profit. So what will happen is that fly-by-night operators will come, no prestigious universities are going to come to India, and the problem of wasted human capital, whereby people are not able to go on to graduate and postgraduate degrees, continues.
Well, I think we've democracy, opening up the sector to innovation, private sector operators, making connections and offering a chance for people around the world to communicate. Those are the sort of themes that are raised, but I'd now love to hear from you. Please feel free to tell us we've got it all wrong or to ask questions. But if you're going to tell us we've got it all wrong, please say it quickly. You can make a statement, but it has to be brief, and I'd really prefer questions. So I'm looking for hands. There's a gentleman over there. I'd like to ideally call on a couple of people, and then good. And a lady in the front and this gentleman. So we're going to start with you, sir, but we'll answer after we've heard all three questions. Go ahead.
It's a two-part question. What are if you are going to compare the educational system and the media regarding ethics, what are the differences, the similarities? And the second question is about criteria of authority. You spoke about reliability. What is exactly the criteria of authority that you as journalists will defend in looking at the new developments in the digital cultures? How can we make sure that what we are reading makes sense, is connected with the facts, is to some extent more than just an interpretation?
Thank you. Those are terrific questions. Ma'am? Can we get a microphone to this lady in the front, please? In the white jacket.
Hi, I'm Joe Agarwal from Doha. My question is about measures for the media industry. You, just like the education industry, you clearly have a great deal of influence in the way people think. But the education industry, because of that, is highly regulated, so it's not purely a market. While in the media industry, your metrics, as I understand them, are circulation and advertising revenue. Is there a need for a metric for the media industry to ensure it has more of a social change?
Okay, good question. And sir in the front.
Oh, hello. Hello. Sorry, is that working? Oh, yes. My name is Michael Shaw. I'm one of the editors of the Times Educational Supplement in London. And we found that 100 years ago we were known as a newspaper, but we now have a website on which teachers upload resources. And last week we had our 100 millionth download from that site. So I'm just wondering what you think the media has a role to play as a platform for teachers to share information with each other.
Okay, so we've got a question which we could have had a whole debate about the difference between journalistic ethics and educational ethics, and also what standards we accept for authority. We have a question about the measures that the media industry is or ought to be subject to beyond circulation and presumably profit. And then we have a question about the use of the media as a platform for teachers and educators to be in touch with each other. I'm going to start on my left, and if you want to pick out a question or if you want to answer all questions, please go ahead.
I'll answer Michael's question. I mean, I can just speak from the experience of the Times of India group, whereby we have very close ties with teachers, principals, deans of colleges and universities, and they provide counseling to students via print, that is through the Education Times and the newspapers and Education Supplement. They provide counseling now online. That is very big, through our Mission and myeducationtimes.com website. And we guarantee that these people will give guidance to students within 24 hours of the question being asked online. That's for Mission and Mission, where it's time critical, and on Education Times, we guarantee a reply within 48 hours. In addition, we have face-to-face counseling for students when they are at a very critical juncture, which is when they are transitioning from having cleared the 12th standard to university education. Regarding Ms. Agarwal's question, I'm not very clear whether she was asking whether the media industry needs to be subjected to new matrices, because, I mean, we are private sector, so profit, revenue and cash flow has to be our goal, along with societal welfare. I don't see that changing in the near term. Whether the education industry needs to be subjected to new matrices, I'm not really qualified to answer.
And do you want to take a punt at ethics, or do you want to leave that for somebody else? It's fine either way.
No.
I will try to answer. I would say journalism is quite the same job than teachers. I mean, journalism is not a science, and we try to inform the debate, confronting the different point of views. And one of our missions is to explain the complexity of the world, and I think teachers have quite the same mission. We do not talk with the same publics, but the mission, which is vulgarization, is almost the same. It would be the first point. About regulation, in France we have both public and private medias, and our public service is quite efficient, and I think provide independent news about education and about military affairs, for example, or business debates and this kind of debates. So there is no difference between public and private medias in France in the way they cover the different subjects. So I think that the fact that I work for a private media is not a guarantee for independence, but I think it's not a handicap for independence and for our capacity for explaining the world around us. And third point, I heard the figures you gave us about your platform, and we would like to have the same project for Le Monde, because we believe that we could create something like a social network on educational issues, and we think that we could help the French teaching community to exchange, to share best practices. And we know that in different social site, website, there are some sharing of best practice in France, but nothing organized as you did for the Time ITOS supplement. And I think it could be something like a teaching social network. And I think we could implement this kind of projects, because there is a strong expectation from the teachers on this kind of subjects.
Thank you. Maybe you'll compare notes later. Philippe.
Concerning the first question of ethics, I share the view of Luc that after all, both teachers and journalists are intellectual workers, and that they share more or less the same values. One could say even that journalists are more protected against influence. There is a special status for journalists, which I think doesn't exist for teachers, or it's not the same thing. Journalists are working on with a short-term vision, teachers with a long-term. It's more or less the same. For Euronews, as I said before, we have a public remit. We have 21 shareholders. No one has the majority, so we work in full independence. On the second question about reliability from the information coming from the digital world, one must say that it is a problem, because, as you know, there has been a lot of tricks in the information coming from the web. And the only possibility for a reliable media, like we are around this table, is to check the information. So it is checked and rechecked. In our case, since we are multilingual, for each information we have access to so many sources as languages. So we have 11 journalists checking the same information, which gives an additional reliability, I would say. On the following question about metrics, I don't know which metrics we are thinking about, but of course in the media industry we have audience measurements, which exist on a national basis normally. It's more difficult on an international basis. I think the IHT and ourselves, we share some measurements which are called EMS, European Media Survey for Europe. Maybe you are not familiar with this. It's very specific to European media, but so it exists. It is defining the audience of the media and also the profile of the viewers or the readers, but it doesn't go into in depth into the way of the content. In fact, it doesn't refer very much on the metric of the content. On the last question, platform for teachers to communicate between themselves. We pretend to have created a learning world for that, so it's available for everybody here who wants to communicate with others to use this learning world platform. So I encourage you to go on Euronews site and to use it.
I'm going to answer the last question first. I think all of us here who have, in some sense, established media outlets would love to and feel envious of what you've accomplished. Also, I think there's a way that it's probably part of an intelligent business plan for any information source. We are, in some sense, all as journalists in the education business, but in a way, I'm just going to speak briefly to both of your questions together, because there's a way in which they're related, which is we have metrics of circulation, and we have whether we make a profit. But in a sense, you're asking for something else, something like reputation or reliability, perhaps. But how do you put a number on it? And that also goes to the question of our ethics, because our reliability is, I think, at the core of what journalistic ethics are supposed to be about. Now, my academic training is an historian, and I can tell you that there is something philosophically naive about when people say that they check their facts, because what that means tends to mean for a journalist is that somebody else has said it first, and then you're safe to repeat it. So personally, I feel like the surest way to know something is true is to find it out for yourself. But I do think that as a profession, we have a kind of great unmentioned, if not an elephant in the room, then certainly a soft spot in our philosophical underpinnings, which is this business of to be fancy for a moment, the epistemology of journalism and how we know that what we say we know we actually know. But that's perhaps for another day. Are there more questions, please? Because we've got, oh good. Lady in the front, can we get a microphone over here? And then I'm going to see if and there's a lady in the front over there. I'm going to call on you first, and then you, and then if there's a third question, I'll take it, and then we'll have the answers. Please just say who you are and your affiliation before you ask your question. I meant to say that before, sorry.
My name is Lucia Seropian, and I'm a feature writer for a local magazine, Isola magazine. I'd like to know, since both Le Monde and the TV, Euronews, and India Times are very interested in featuring or having supplements on education, I would like to know if the media is interested in raising or developing a contest on the best features or best practices or best coverage on education in order to encourage more positive reporting or factual reporting or reliable reporting. I would also like to know if there is if there are specialized educational reporters in every magazine, or if any reporter can become an educational reporter.
Okay. And can we have a microphone in the front on the other side, please? First, your name and your affiliation, then your question.
Yeah, my name is Regina. I'm from the New African magazine. I'm the deputy editor there. Mine is actually probably more of an observation as well as a question. I've just noticed that the panel is actually consisting of people probably who are guaranteed media in order to practice freely. So my observation is, what would be the panel's view on the media that cannot practice as freely, and it's a question of he who pays the piper calls the tune, in terms of some media houses, particularly in Southern Africa, for example, where you cannot actually practice what you preach because of repression, media repression.
So our views on unfree media, if you like.
Please.
And is there a third question? If not, those are two terrific questions. Just in the back there.
Hi, I'm Erin Miller. I'm a journalist from Canada, an education journalist. And I just wanted to make another point to add to what you were saying from a different perspective, and that is that I've noticed in Canada that more and more of the education coverage is happening instead of with dedicated education journalists that are reporting and are on a beat, they're more and more in supplements that are advertiser based. And, you know, for instance, we do a lot of business school supplements where the schools are the advertisers. And although there's never been any real direct influence there, you know, there's this indirect influence. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, is there more of a role for supplements, and has that affected your coverage and your story sense?
Okay, so we have one question is, do the people here think that some form of prize or greater recognition for educational journalists would raise our standards, perhaps, or help to propagate better educational journalism? And the second set of questions is about, on the one hand, our view of the media, the unfree media, and then whether even in the so-called in the world where you have no governmental intervention, other forces, for example, market forces, advertisers, you know, what kind of influence they have, how we handle that. I'm going to start this time with Houston. Go ahead.
I'll answer two of the questions. Regarding your question, yes, we have dedicated education reporters, roughly 100 of them across the country, across newspapers and Education Times, as well as our for the main paper. Regarding the question there, do advertisers impact news? The answer is a definite yes. The reality is, and they affect it more, for example, in India than in Western countries, which have a better balance of circulation and advertising revenue. In a country like India, 90% of your revenue comes from advertising. And if you write against an advertiser who also happens to be an educational client, he has the right to take his business elsewhere, which means your paper can go bankrupt. So you have to be very careful how you cover them.
For Le Monde, we have 6 dedicated reporters for education, and they produce different contents. The printing contents for Le Monde, and each Wednesday special double pages about education. And I think I would like to have 100 journalists for this question. But with 6 journalists, it is, I think, one of the most important newsroom dedicated to education in France. For advertisement, it is a very good question, but it's a question of balance between revenues from circulation and revenues from advertisement. And unfortunately, I would say in France, revenues from advertisement are quite low. So we don't suffer too much from lobbying from our advertisers. The most difficult question in France would come from the public administration, and they often try to interfere with our publications, because it is something like a tradition in France to have politicians who would like to influence the newspapers. So we have to be cautious with advertiser and with politicians. And the last point, I think that we're still protected as journalists in France for educational issues, because the private sector is quite weak. So the relationships between the newspapers, the medias, and the business, the education industry are not too difficult for us.
Thank you. Philippe.
In Euronews, we also have dedicated education journalists, but not as many as Times of India, and a figure close to the one of Le Monde, around 6, full-time and part-time. But of course, it's a profession to know about education, so they need to increase their awareness of the education system. Concerning the freedom of journalism, it is of course an issue in many parts of the world. By the way, there is an organization who you may know, which is Reporters Sans Frontières, which is actively pursuing the state of freedom of journalism across the world. It's a very interesting organization who issues annual reports, and we have close ties with them, and we try to when there is a specific story in a part of the world about journalism going to jail, or even being threatened and in danger of life, sometimes we make a specific report on air about this. So Reporters Sans Frontières is certainly an organization which is of interest for everybody. Concerning the influence of advertising to content in general, not only in education, we have very strict laws in France, so which prohibit, at least for TV media, but I suppose for press it's the same, which prohibits advertisers of being of the same field as the content itself. So we don't feel any influence from advertisers at all. In addition of that, as I said before, we have a public remit, so we don't feel concerned by this.
Very briefly, it might be a good idea to have more recognition for excellence in journalistic reportage. On the other hand, I think journalists' egos are big enough, and we don't need any more prizes. I think it is very important to bear in mind that the ability of people, particularly the people you're reporting about, to speak freely. And I think it imposes special obligations on us as reporters when we're reporting from places or about people who are not always able to speak freely, both in terms of pushing harder to get what's actually going on and in terms of being protective of sources. And the influence of advertising, and particularly the way in which education has become a huge business, so that these advertisers are now important advertisers, I think that's an interesting question. I do think it's changing. The New York Times obviously doesn't like to ever think it can be pushed around by anybody, but we all have to survive. On the other hand, the economics of journalism are changing too. So as education is becoming more of a business, advertising is becoming less a part of what keeps newspapers alive. So in a way, as media becomes more dependent on its consumers for its income, it may be that that gives us all a little bit of extra independence. Maybe that's just optimism. Anyway, I see that we actually ran out of time several minutes ago, so this has been fascinating. Thank you all for sitting through it and for contributing to it, and particularly thanks to Sunit and Philippe and Luc for bearing with me. And it's been a great pleasure and a great honor to be here. Thank you.